Hello, everybody. I'm Marcel from the Software Architecture Group at the HPI at the University of Potsdam in Germany. And today I'm talking a little bit about relentless repairability or reckless reuse. I try to not talk too much so that we can share some experiences from the audience here about whether or not to rebuild a concern, a feature with your familiar tools and materials, right? So do you reuse something that's already there? Do you make your hands dirty and write it your own, following your own values and practices? At the beginning, I want to repeat a little dialogue between two persons. I think in the essay, the first person I called Harmony. Harmony is a small talker. Think about desktop application having your full technology stack under control. In this case, the execution environment, your virtual machine, the language level, the tools, the applications. You know about everything. You are in full control, and it means that you are able to repair things when they go wrong. If you miss a feature and you made a mistake, you can go in, fix it um, without a lot of effort. Second person I called Grace is on the reuse side, right? So still a small talk about writing JavaScript these days, HTML, CSS, having access to this huge community of web developers, right? So just import some JavaScript code, get a new feature in, extend your system. Still a lively system, right? So you have these same kind of small talk properties in there, but you embrace the full sharing. As I will not change my voice here, I will use these two slides to indicate who's talking. Hi there. Anything new in Squeak this morning? Hello. Yes, I finished the refactoring and partial rewrite of the font file parser. Font rendering? Huh. I thought that there was already this plugin. Yeah, we have quite a few implementations at this point. I worked on the one in the base system. It did not age very well over the years. Why didn't you just delete that code and use the existing plugin? We don't want to ship more dependencies with the virtual machine. And now that we have a simple implementation in Smalltalk, users can actually explore and learn about the font format and extend it. And you can render all Unicode code points and international texts, I suppose. Not quite. I still have to work on the font stack and fallbacks. Also, text composition is still limited to Western fonts. Well, there's at least by character line break support for Japanese text. So still a long way to go, huh? In Lively, with all these things working out of the box, Google takes care of it. A lot of people are working on that. But you cannot look into the implementation, right? We don't need to. It just works, and it's free. What if a user does not have the Chrome browser installed? Well, they can use other web browsers. International text rendering should work there as well. And our system should perform good enough in other browsers. You are only optimized for Chrome, right? A platform that you cannot control. The community around web development is huge. I wouldn't bother. And Lively itself? What if you use a not yet standardized feature that Google's Chrome interprets differently than, say, Apple Safari? Yeah, we had that in the past. The community around Lively is not super big, and you can install Chrome on macOS as well. Nothing to worry about. Harmony takes a sip of soda and changes the subject. Ha, okay. Well, besides fonts, I also discovered a rather interesting overhead in the code that handles mouse clicks in push buttons. You have to write that kind of low-level code? Is there even time to program actually useful stuff? The base system is useful. People use it to develop all kinds of applications. Take our students, for example. They really appreciate a responsive system. I forgot that Squeak's morphic is at the breaking point of responsiveness. Do you even get 60 frames per second? Sure. If you follow some simple practices, you can get sufficient rendering performance out of the system. It's still based on BitBlit from the 70s, right? What about those high-resolution displays, 4K? Are there still no accelerated graphics? Is it still CPU bound? Yes, that's okay. Most of the application's graphics in Squeak have mostly stable contents between frames. Maybe because one cannot easily implement something more dynamic like a full-frame animated 3D application? Oh, you can. You can write your own VM plugins to get more performance. Bypassing objects and messaging, well, people have done that. And what about the tangibility and directness that your Morphic provides? Could you still click on those 3D elements and explore them if your custom VM plugin does accelerated magic? One would have to consider that too, I suppose. In Chrome, graphics are fast, and I can still inspect all the nodes of the document object model. It actually feels like Squeak's Morphic. Harmony then tries to think of a feature in Squeak that is comparably powerful, but not available in Sage's Lively system. But you cannot interrupt and debug a long-running script, right? The Smalltalk debugger is awesome, and users can hit Command dot anytime the system gets stuck. Well, no, we cannot do that. I miss that sometimes. Have you tried writing a browser plugin to extend debugging support somehow? Not sure whether Google even wants you to have this kind of control over that very fast JavaScript VM. It seems like Squeak and Lively makes quite some different trade-offs. Yeah, it seems so. So these two kind of related but different cultures follow different trade-offs, right? When they think about, okay, I want to have this new feature in my system, what's more important? Is it repairability in the long term? Like, do I want to implement this, follow my own values and practices, and hopefully have low effort maintenance in the long term? Or do I want to reuse what's already there, right? So I plug in some external module from a foreign community. Hopefully the code is open source. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's a black box. Still, what about the community that wrote this module? And is it compatible with my values? And what if a bug occurs? Can I file a bug request? Can they fix it? Should I do some workaround and so on? So this dilemma is an imbalance of these problem forces with no obvious or generic solution to resolve it. And this is what this essay was about, right? So you have the situation where you need something in your software system, and you think about, okay, should we invest some time and effort to build it with our own tools and materials, or should we try to reuse something and just build an adapter for it? Thinking about values and practices, well, we have these different areas, right? The values of your programming system, right? Well, what do you value? So in our case, it's openness, it's liveness, it's short feedback loops, like having a malleable, changeable system with a direct interaction, like that we can go into anything that's not looking right, make a change, and then go on using this system. In the community, we value communication and respect and curiosity, but also forgiveness, because if you look at the practices, those are on the exploratory programming side, right? So we embrace experimentation. Failure is not punished, but because we want to learn something, the specifications unfold most of the time gradually. So you learn something about what the customer actually wants, and then you figure out how to build this in a nice way. So our dilemma will intensify if reuse drags in largely different values and practices, because you fear that if something goes wrong, you have to implement it maybe anyway. So how can we balance these forces that represents our hopes and fears when choosing between re-implementation for long-term repairability and reuse for the short-term gain? So we don't know that, and we wish we did. We observe this kind of issue in our Smalltalk systems, so there are kind of different flavors to it. Some try to integrate external modules as much as possible, so shipping more and more dependencies, which virtual machine and so on. And some try to really have implementations in Smalltalk. So in this open system where you can explore what's going on if something goes wrong. So now I will talk a little bit more about the tools and materials we use so that you can better understand why we really want to have all these features in the system itself and are reluctant to reuse something from outside this world. So first, you have a system boundary here. Maybe think of your own systems, IDEs, whatever you like to use, and maybe you find something similar there. So we have a system boundary, and within that, you have your workspace, right? Some tools, some space to write code in. And in that system, you have a common language, some shared data structures, integrated tools, Explorer extractions, you name it. And now we need something new, right? So the internal module would be the new thing inside the system. And if you want to reuse something outside some external module, you at least have to write some form of adapter, right? It's not for free, But the expectations are it's not too expensive to write this adapter. And so we have our forces again, right? So if I write it internally, I can reuse stuff from inside my system. If I reuse something from the external world, I still have to write this adapter, and maybe I have a time. I'm positive on the time efficiency side. My community can grow because I have all these nice features. If I cannot deliver the features, maybe people run away. These are all these kind of interesting forces that make it really hard to follow your own values and practices. For our side, okay, you saw a little bit, so we are in this Smalltalk system. We have the Smalltalk language. It's an object-oriented paradigm. It's a self-sustaining system. You have all kinds of tools for exploration and direct manipulation elements. Speaking of the mindset of us as Smalltalk programmers, well, it's on the exploratory side, right? So we talk to a customer or a user. We want to figure out what they want, and then we try to make this happen, right? There's this constant communication. And once we roughly understood what new feature is needed, we start talking with our system. And so we have kind of a space in the system where we can type something, draw something, drop some file into, and so on. And so we start asking questions of the system, making some input, getting some results back. As we do that, we accumulate a pile of questions in the system, right? So we write code, we make experiments in some kind of relevant command line interfaces, and so on. And so we can also access prior questions and revise those questions. The system keeps on responding in a happy way, in a not so happy way, like throwing errors or doing what we want, and so on. So we can use all these responses in continuous questions, in the onward questions. And until we find a situation where we're happy, where the new feature is implemented, and so on. Right, so this kind of interface, rather abstract, right, could be anything. For us, it's mostly software, right? Windows, we click somewhere, we have a database to write into, to read from, and so on. And a lot of those, right? A lot of databases, Windows, and so on. So this is kind of the medium we talk to when we want to write our code. So we have this environment here. And so we try to do a lot of things with it. We ask simple questions, we ask complex questions. Sometimes it takes a lot of time to process. We expect some kind of a prompt there where we can type in our thoughts. We expect that the system will keep on working when we make a mistake. Just tell us, is it right, is it wrong, and so on. So like, we really want to learn something about the specification, so about the problem space and the solution space, and so on. And we want to directly reference responses or directly click on something that doesn't look right. So this is the space we want to work in. And this is why we're really interested in having all these features inside that system. What could it be? All kinds of parsers, supporting file formats, handling different user input across platforms, like how is Windows giving mouse clicks to the system compared to Linux or Mac OS. So how can we support international users, rendering all these kinds of different fonts. And so these are all these features we want to have in the system. Then we can build applications for all these different target groups. And so regarding our mindset, we see it as a very intensive form of user-to-software mediation. So where developers are especially motivated to find a design that both works and inspires. I know it when I see it. So I need all these tools to keep on working on the solution, right? So programming languages are expressive enough to unfold anything from unsurprising complexity to surprisingly beautiful simplicity. And we want the latter part. So it doesn't matter if we're writing a graphics card driver or we do some high-level scripting or in the world of model-driven development. This is all the same regarding this fundamental problem here. So at the end of the essay, I tried to summarize the issue as follows. So should we reuse that existing module written in a different languages, maybe by a different community, following different values? We would really like to have an implementation, in our case, written in Smalltalk by our community following our values. Can this desire form a vision that encourages an entire community to seek for innovation in the field of liveness and exploration, right? This is also why we want to have this in the system. We want to evolve the system. And if nobody writes code for it, so how could we learn what's wrong, what's working and what's not working? Or might it be one of the reasons that such noble values get scattered and diminished because nobody is following them anyway, so to eventually be forgotten in history? And we think it comes down to two things, of course, time and people. So it takes time to learn the practices, to understand the values, of course, to also implement the feature I'm wanting to have. And of course, we need the people who are willing to invest that time to maybe have this knowledge or willing to acquire it. In the essay, I gave some anecdotal perspectives in this problem space here. At the beginning of my talk today, I tried to illustrate the issue where we have two cultures that are kind of similar, but still follow rather different trade-offs. So we had this large body of web resources for the lively kernel developer that promote sharing and reuse, right? So where you might be tempted to not implement it on your own, but just load some JavaScript module from some resource to keep going. And on the downside, of course, you have almost no control over the execution layer of your high-level system. So do you bother? Or do you say, like, okay, once we get to the point where maybe the Google Chrome browser prohibits some kind of dynamic code execution, we will find a different platform and then move the entire community to another space. Is it worth the risk? So until now, it seems to be working quite well. Second perspective here I brought for the talk is the paradigm issue. So Smalltalk is an object-oriented language. Well, the feature you want to implement might not map to objects that well. Maybe you need some data flow expressions. Maybe you have another perspective on your issue, and then you start thinking about, can I model this problem with objects, or do I first have to implement a whole new framework, a data flow framework, and then I can start implementing my features. So this also takes place in this reuse versus implementation question. And well, finally, it's about this expert knowledge, right? If you want to say, have something related to security, or for example, so do you actually know about cryptography? Well, what do you know about this kind of domain? Are you willing to take the risk to learn about it, to make mistakes, or do you rely on other communities who spend a lot of effort to get these libraries polished and following the specification right? The issue of trust in the stability could affect your community as well. If the features you provide are too brittle, people may run away as well. So users will not use your system and platforms. So this could be the reason to import that external module, and that is hopefully polished and ready to use. And I also talked a little bit in the essay about this 80-20 principle, where we had this in the keynote this morning, this good enough space, where you say, like, okay, it's really not important to fully understand or have a specification. We just get started, see what we need now, and it's an open system. People can add features along the way if they don't care about the other 20%. If it's not an issue. I'm not aware of, I don't know, a spaceship powered with Smalltalk. So, for example, so maybe maybe it's okay because it's just a different use case there. And I think I stop at this point, and I want to encourage you to maybe think of a similar experience you had in your career. Where was it that you choose between reuse or re-implementation? Maybe you regretted that after some point and then went on and reverted your decisions. So I would like to use the remaining 15 minutes to just talk about that. Thank you for your attention. Good. Perhaps. You don't think it works? Oh, well, it's gone there.
That sounds hopeful. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so really we want to try and spend some time now in a discussion, and Marcel, if you'd be good enough to kind of summarise the contributions for the people online so they can hear as well, that would be very useful. I'm going to start off. I'm glad you reminded us of Mary Shaw's talk, her keynote talk this morning, and there are certainly commonalities between the themes she was bringing out, what you were saying. I wondered whether your conversation at the beginning between the Squeak developer and the Lively developer, whether you'd see a parallel with the left-hand side and the right-hand side of Mary's kind of table at the end of her talk, the kind of, principal software engineer and the pragmatic vernacular developer.
You mean like the rational thinking software developer and the like, I just wanted to work? Yeah, could be. At some point, well, this discussion I mentioned happens frequently at our group. So it's actually it's derived from some lunch discussions I have with a colleague in our group, and so he's very happy in this world. I'm happy in that world, and it's at points I can observe myself to invest too much effort into implement these things, hoping that they will be appreciated by our students, for example, because this is the user group we have at hand. So I know these will be the faces that will interact with the system, and I also understand this the web development side. So you don't know your user group, but you expect people to be out there because they just can import anything that's beyond your control, and of course you don't know if the quality is what you expect, but it's really how's it called? It's nice to have the possibility, at least, to have all this content available, right? So this is maybe the downside from this. It's not closed, the Smalltalk system.
Do you feel it's a generational shift? Like the script kiddies are very happy just to import anything in npm and use random JavaScript libraries, and perhaps more traditional older people.
Well, could be. Could be the way the Smalltalk system has a standard library, so there's that. So from the npm point of view, I think the main reason was that there was no standard library to begin with, and people started to accumulating, I don't know, sort functions, filtering, whatever. So you have these micro reuse things here. This is not so much the point of the essay, though, because writing your own, I don't know, filter function might be on the side. Just do it. Don't reuse the package if you can. Just make it more balanced out with your existing software architecture there. Could be a cultural thing, yes, especially this poking around thing, right? If you don't have you don't want to understand this, just implement some application. I come from the point where I want to improve the base system. So like, what's the base system from in the Lively world, for example? There is a base system. Like, there are core maintainers for the basic platform where they write their own stuff, but they reuse a lot of stuff, and this is where maybe the Google Chrome platform comes into play. They don't care that they have no control about this aspect. They complain from time to time about web workers and stuff, but they accept it. It seems to be still okay.
Can we invite contributions or questions from other people? Good, excellent, thank you very much. So we want this to be as interactive as possible, so please pass the microphone around. Thank you.
Thank you. So maybe I'll try to be a little controversial here.
Please do. Controversy is good. Yes.
So there's this there's definitely this notion that you want to rewrite, you want to build it yourself, and I see that a lot in some communities I work in. But why do we think that rebuilding it, repairing it is going to be any better than something? At least if something's being reused and has more people have used it, it's been tested. Isn't it better to find out problems in the things we already have and improve those rather than to start and rebuild it each time? I think we tend to be very confident that we can build it, and I see it a lot in community, especially scientific community. They just keep rebuilding the tools because they think that they don't understand it, they think it's not good enough, they're afraid of those components, so they just rewrite the same thing over and over, and they do the same, they build in errors, they build in faults. It's the first time, so it takes a long time to be able to build it. So.
Right, this is the if interested people interested in the implementation or in the domain look at some old code, they say like, oh, what's that? I can do it better, and then they re-implement it, and after some months or so, they say, that's why they had it done this way, and then like, okay, now we have 2 implementations, and yeah. From the teaching perspective, it takes a long time to teach students to write, in this case, good Smalltalk code, to teach them object composition and to kind of give them examples they can learn from. And this is the reason I would really like to have common features written in that language, polished over time, so that when new people come into the game, you can say like, take a look at this kind of implementation. Maybe this comes from the language itself, that I think it's mostly readable. You can kind of understand the specification that's in the system, right? And this is why it would be sad to call out via FFI to a C library, for example. This is the biggest contrast we have in this ecosystem, where you wouldn't bother to read the code. It's too dangerous maybe for you as a Smalltalk programmer, segment memory access violations all over the place if you try to poke around, whatever. And so it's the teaching perspective that I think motivates me to re-implement things, polish them. But it's really hard to agree on what's really good or a bad implementation. Thank you.
Thank you. I was just going to mumble something about conceptual integrity, but I'll save that for later. Pass on to you. Thank you.
That was a really good talk. I'll go back and read the essay subsequently. Thank you.
Thank you.
I feel like in the time I've been in software development for a while now, like it's become much easier to reuse stuff. The tooling has become better, right? It's like 20 years ago, reusing C++ was hard work because you get binary, etc. And so the trade-off has become more relevant now today than it's ever been before, I think, because the tooling gets better. But I kind of wonder if there's an optimal size of the community involved, because like I've reused code in the Haskell ecosystem, I've used Smalltalk, but in the Rust ecosystem, and also in the NPM ecosystem, right? And I wonder if the community is too small, then it doesn't produce enough output. But if it's too big, you don't have coherence and values. And I find reusing stuff in the NPM world really fraught, because it's an enormous community. There's a lot of different styles of development. There's people with different quality trade-offs there. But my experience in the Rust and Haskell ecosystems has been much more positive, because I feel like, well, I mean, I've got more admiration for languages for starters, but that's a personal perspective. But then so do the rest of the people in those communities, I think, who are driven by their. And so I wonder if it's just a size thing is important there. It's big enough to produce useful output, but small enough that the community has coherent values. It's just an idea.
The size of the community definitely has an impact on the decision you do when you think about a new thing you need in your system. Especially when thinking about this, let's call it sweet spot in the implementation quality, right? If you have loads of things to choose from, this might be tricky to find the good stuff. If you're only 2, 3, a handful of Smalltalk developers, for example, they agree on something, then you think it's good. And if you're in the middle ground there, then you maybe find and agree on a good module, and then everybody starts using it. Maybe it goes into the language, the base system, whatever. I'm not too familiar with this ecosystem and how they evolved over the years. Maybe the community had the right size.
Well, I think maybe you don't tend to use those languages until you have strong opinions on the languages. I'm not sure how many people in the JavaScript ecosystem have strong opinions on using JavaScript because it's good. It's because they need it, they want to run it in a browser. Yeah. Whereas most people who choose to use Rust or Haskell have probably got reasons to do that, but do you know what I mean? The sort of internal.
Maybe it's also difference between the systems programmer or some application developer, right? If you really want to write code for somebody to build up on, and do you really want, at that level, do you really want to reuse critical components that you cannot control? Because,
Thank you.
Thank you. I do think in a very large community like JavaScript, you end up with subcultures grouping around different frameworks or philosophies, and perhaps that then has the kind of effect of, like you're saying, a kind of more coherent ecosystem like the Haskell world, perhaps. Yes. Further comments or questions, please? You have questions? You looked inquiringly.
No,
No, you don't. No, sorry. Yes, okay, I beg your pardon, misunderstanding there. Yeah, good. Thank you. Please.
Thank you for the presentation. It seems like one of the core dichotomies between the two approaches was short-term versus long-term risk and rewards. When one is seemingly safer or easier in the short term and one is safer or easier in the long term, wouldn't the hybrid approach be the obvious solution to the tension between them, where you start with the short-term, a higher short-term upside while working on the long-term solution?
I think this is what happens at the moment, at least in the Squeak Smalltalk ecosystem. So you have you have reuse, for example, regarding the security layer, to reuse platform-specific features implemented from Microsoft employees or Apple and so on. And at some point, you also have cryptography algorithms in the Smalltalk land where you don't write them primarily for teaching, but you have an implementation that is explorable and also usable, play around with hashing functions and so on, and use them to implement your email client in Smalltalk and then do some signing and so on. And if you plug in an external module that's just working, then having a small community and still talking about let's just start implementing our own is even harder, right? So because there's something that's working out of the box, why should we invest effort in this on this place here? I want to build some application, whatever. So this is still it's this hybrid approach is happening, and if you're not careful enough, people still tend to reuse too many hard things from other ecosystems, and then the some core values might degrade. So like if you don't have any implementations that get better over time in Smalltalk, you cannot argue Smalltalk is a nice language to implement this or that concern because you have nothing to show for. Just as an example, if you want to motivate the design of language, whether it's suitable for this or that concern. But yes, thank you. The hybrid approach is the current way to go, and especially if you don't know better and you just flip a coin and say like, okay, go that way. Or if you don't have the time to implement or try to implement it. Well, if you have a week to spare, you can definitely do a spike and try to figure out, can we do this or that? And let's go back to this font rendering stuff. There have been a lot of experiments in the past from plugging in things from the outside, writing some Smalltalk code that is explorable and so on. And interestingly, even when you argue that the things from the outside are feature complete in terms of text composition and stuff, they are still kind of tricky to include into other components in the system itself. You make some trade-offs, like you cannot this morphic thing in the Squeak world kind of depends on certain objects being there, and if you just give this passive canvas out of your control, let some library fill the pixels, then you lose a lot more than just an explorable implementation.
I guess the problem with the hybrid approach is when the scaffolding becomes subsumed into the structure itself, and maybe we're talking much more quickly. I'm going to give you a minute just to summarize the discussion perhaps myself, and then we'll move on to the next talk and the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, so this is still an open question, right? So you have a new feature and you want to decide whether you just reuse an external module from some other community or build it your own, given that your community is large enough or has enough time to spare. The hybrid approach is what's happening, right? So really hard problems get to be reused, and from the teaching perspectives, it would be nice to have more implementations, not just being open source, but being in a form that is digestible, right? So that it's code that you can understand, the architectures that you like, the practices you follow. Yeah, thank you for all your comments.
Thank you.